Almost 4,000 Jews found refuge in this quiet corner of England during 1939. In the face of a rapidly escalating humanitarian disaster, the coordinated efforts of activists in the Jewish community and beyond had established a remarkable safe haven for the stateless. The process of making Germany Judenrein, free of Jews, started as soon as Hitler's Nazi party rose to power. At first, Jews were systematically excluded from society, until eventually laws were passed that formally stripped them of their citizenship. After 5 years of Nazi rule, about a quarter of Germany's approximately 500,000 Jews had emigrated, mostly to neighbouring France, Belgium, Czechoslovakia and the Netherlands. The world watched the effects of these discriminatory policies with trepidation. Sympathy expressed for the plight of Jewish refugees was tempered by a reluctance by most governments to offer practical help. But the events of 1938 changed everything. Hitler's annexation of Austria sent a wave of panic throughout the remaining Jewish community, igniting a refugee crisis that was becoming more and more difficult to ignore. In July 1938, an international delegation descended upon the Hotel Royal in Evian beside Lake Geneva to discuss the burgeoning refugee crisis. Participating governments had already agreed not to fund emergency emigration or increase their entry quotas. It was 10 days of hot air and shallow platitudes. Britain has no intention of abandoning our policy of granting asylum to refugees. We are actively considering acquiring land in the Kenyan colony for a small-scale settlement of Jews. Lord Winterton, head of the UK delegation. Australia has no real racial problem, and we are not desirous of importing one by encouraging any scheme of large-scale foreign migration. Colonel T.W. White, head of the Australian delegation. Delegates arranged to reconvene for further deliberation on what they agreed was this most urgent of issues. Norman Bentwich, representing the Central British Fund for German Jewry, wryly quipped, "It's notable that Evian spells naive backwards." The Obergruppenführer Reinhard Heydrich responded on behalf of the German government, "This clearly demonstrates a widespread aversion to accommodate these Jews, either out of social considerations or, and this is more likely, from unexpressed racial abhorrence." And then, on November the 9th, a frenzy of violence was unleashed. A riot, a pogrom. In the words of a future Kitchener camp inmate, "I was taken to a room where more Jews were being held. Then they marched us through the streets under armed guard. Jewish homes were being ransacked, shop doors and windows were being smashed, and our beloved synagogue was in flames." The authorities branded the atrocity Kristallnacht, as if the buildings were the real casualties. Almost 100 lives were lost that night, some out of fear by their own hands. Many more were brutally attacked, and 30,000 men were taken to concentration camps. Nazi strategists were delighted by the passivity of the masses. Panic gripped the Jewish community, and finally, the outside world began to see what had been staring them in the face all along. Brand it how you like. The night of broken glass, the November pogrom, it was the turning point. In Britain, Jewish community leaders appealed to the government for help. First of all, in rescuing Jewish child refugees, the Kindertransport. Temporary visas were issued on condition that private financial guarantees could be found to cover all costs. And in late 1938, Leo Beck, a prominent leader of the German Jewry, urged that a place of refuge be established on British soil for the thousands of Jewish men trapped in the hellholes of Dachau, Sachsenhausen, Buchenwald, warning that in a very short space of time, The German government will take steps that would lead to the practical extinction of its Jews. Permission was obtained to adapt an abandoned army training camp at Richborough, named after Lord Kitchener, into a facility for refugees. The plan was to accommodate a rolling population of about 3,500, with new refugees replacing those who leave. Minutes from a December meeting of the Central British Fund for German Jewry recorded, "This venture is considered to be of the utmost urgency if an even greater disaster than that which occurred in November is to be avoided." The task of setting up and running the camp was taken on by the Jewish Lads Brigade. Brigade stalwarts Jonas May, his brother Phineas, and architect Ernest Joseph made their way to the Kent coast to start their daunting task of breathing life into a site that had been untouched since the Great War. They later recalled, "First inspection, snow is deep on the ground. Only inhabitant is a fox. Land is marshy and ill-drained, no wiring, poor water supply, no cooking or heating facilities. Quite frankly, the whole idea seems almost ridiculous. Initial work on the site has been undertaken by a local labourer. A refugee electrician has duly arrived. We gave him a hearty welcome. Peculiarly enough, his name is Adolf, same as that well-known fellow Austrian whose arm-raising activities are the reason we're here in the first place." Gradually, life returned to the Kitchener camp, as Phineas recorded in his diary. "Held a proper Friday evening service in my office. Jonas's wife blessed the candles, which stood proudly in beautiful candlesticks a refugee had brought from home. Took a group of men into the village with a bundle of letters. A chatty policeman greeted us and offered to post the letters. The refugees were aghast. They'd never seen a friendly policeman before." Kitchener Camp was slowly evolving into a tiny town, largely overseen by the resident refugees, providing a level of autonomy and trust that enabled these broken men the space to regain some equilibrium. At Dover docks, officials became accustomed to the sight of new arrivals with worldly goods reduced to what could be held in two hands. As Phineas recorded, more refugees arrived from Vienna. Some of them are musicians with their instruments. Customs questioned whether they could actually play them. If not, they'd be liable to pay duty. There followed an impromptu short but excellent concert, much to the delight of onlookers and the enwrapped officials of the customs house. The camp population was constantly changing. A small number of women, often with very young children, were able to gain entry to Britain with domestic visas and temporarily joined their husbands. Many refugees with visas to Australia, America or Canada left for their new homes, sometimes provoking painful farewells, as Phineas wrote. Out of the blue, a father suddenly arrives and is reunited with a son who has been here for some time. Last night, a brother of a man who will be leaving tomorrow for Australia arrived. They will now spend one solitary day together for who knows how long. The May brothers approached their work with boundless energy and commitment, but the challenge of overseeing a camp of traumatised men, many of whom were older than them, was enormous. As Phineas recorded, badges have been issued for men to wear according to their hut number, KC1, KC2, KC3, etc. The KC, of course, stands for Kitchener Camp, but K in German is the first letter of concentration camp. It was agreed that anybody objecting to the badge need not wear it. The refugees spent countless hours writing letters home, posting desperate requests to the authorities, pleading for help for loved ones still in Nazi Germany. And there were times when the anguish was just too much to bear. One of our men was found outside the camp, most anxious, striding in the direction of Ramsgate. He said he was going back to Berlin to save his wife, who he was convinced was being murdered by the Nazis. He started to rage against the German staff. The poor chap was obviously in great mental distress. He'd not heard from his wife for 14 days. Local volunteers offered the refugees English tuition. Engineering and agricultural skills classes were set up, designed to aid resettlement. And throughout the camp, music took on a huge significance. To the men, the sounds of Mozart, Beethoven, Strauss were fond cultural remnants of the homelands that had rejected them. And as new musicians arrived, what began as an occasional gathering of instrumental enthusiasts became the official camp orchestra. Concerts were even staged for the residents of Sandwich. Invitation had been through word of mouth, so we had no idea how many people would attend. At first they came in a trickle, but it soon picked up. Eventually there must have been between 600 and 700 guests. The whole show went off very well to an extremely appreciative audience. The orchestra's reputation quickly travelled far beyond Sandwich. Arrangements were even set in place for the BBC to broadcast a live concert from the camp. Phineas could not have been more excited. But it was impossible to ignore the gathering war clouds across the channel. In August, the local press reported the sighting of a suspected spy plane over the camp. It made 2 circuits of the Kitchener camp before flying away, returning the following afternoon and spending considerably longer cruising the camp. The declaration of war closed all official escape routes out of Germany, ending all hopes of being reunited with loved ones, at least for the foreseeable future. Frustration fueled the Kitchener men's need to contribute to the war effort, and soon the curious sight of Germans enthusiastically filling sandbags on the beaches of Kent was gathering crowds of bemused onlookers. And in early October, the Archbishop of Canterbury visited the camp, declaring that perhaps the suffering and cruelty that drove you from your homes will encourage you to come to our aid and rid the world of a tyranny which has too long been allowed to thrive. You would be seen as workers in a common cause. Home Office tribunals were set up to assess the national security risk posed by so-called enemy aliens. The 6 officials who came to Kitchener camp were so disturbed by the testimonies they heard that they sent a joint letter to the Times, which appeared on the front page. A large number of these men, when asked about their families, answered, "I don't know how or where they are living." We heard of transports to camps where men were shot and thrown from moving trains. We find it hard to believe that a government which permitted the treatment to which we have referred, or those who inflicted it, can any longer claim to be civilized. Words that were read by thousands across the country, belying a common-held belief that decision-makers and the population they served were oblivious to the atrocities of the German state. Almost 4,000 Jews found refuge in this quiet corner of England during 1939. In comparison to its sister scheme, the Kindertransport, it remains largely unknown. Although certainly no less traumatic, the experience of the children was one of sanctuary. But for the residents of Kitchener camp, their time on the Kent coast was just one of many episodes. Some joined the Pioneer Corps of the British Army, applying their linguistic skills to intercepting German messages. But after the fall of France, a toxic press campaign stoked fears of enemies within. Along with many other refugees in the country, those Kitchener men who had not joined the army were interned in camps on the Isle of Man. Some were even deported to Australia. For the duration of the war, most Kitchener men lived a hand-to-mouth existence. It's little wonder that by the end of the war, as the darkest of fears for those they had left behind were so tragically confirmed, the camaraderie of Kitchener camp became a distant memory. Displacement is an inevitable consequence of conflict. Perhaps what happened in Sandwich all those years ago carries a message. In the face of a rapidly escalating humanitarian disaster, The coordinated efforts of activists in the Jewish community and beyond won the cooperation of policymakers and established a remarkable safe haven for the stateless. Sadly, the Kitchener Camp scheme was destined to be short-lived. Yet for the year or so it was operational, the foundations of thousands of futures were laid, and the population of Sleepy Sandwich, which had doubled in a handful of months, extended an overwhelmingly warm welcome to their foreign guests. Yet, perhaps its lasting legacy can be found in the contribution made by the new citizens of this country and their future generations' scant repayment for the generosity shown by their adopted home. No music was ever broadcast from the Kitchener Camp Orchestra. A letter from the BBC just before the outbreak of war promised to reopen the matter as soon as the future is a little more certain. And so, in honour of all those who made Kitchener Camp a reality, and in memory of the millions of victims of Nazi Germany who were not able to find refuge, this music is for them.